There are some clear powerhouse teams at the top of the NFL, but which one of them is going to fail in 2024? We'll tell you on a Thursday edition of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to a Thursday edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. I am one of your hosts, Tyler Rowland, local expert from Locked On Titans, here with my co-host, Alex Clancy, local expert for Locked On Cardinals. We have a great show ready for you guys today. Who is a powerhouse team that will fail in 2024? Who is a powerhouse team that will stay good in 2024? And which of the old guard quarterbacks is ready to bounce back and have a great season? Before we get into all of that, I do want to let you know that today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday, NFL content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But there are some great teams in the NFL that people see, at the top of the league. Think about teams like Kansas City, San Francisco, Buffalo, Baltimore, Detroit, Philly even, although they had a little bit of a down year last year, still a ton of talent. Some honorable mentions like Cincinnati, Miami, Green Bay, teams that have been in the mix and have been considered, the top teams in the NFL. Now, Alex, out of all of those teams, are there any of those powerhouse units that you think have a big step back coming in 2024?
Buffalo.
You've been on it. You've been on it now.
I've been on it. And you don't root for that. And Buffalo's got some of the best fans
Right.
The most philanthropic fans. Anytime somebody gets hurt on their field, they donate to that charity. Sorry, it's wild. It's wild what they've done, the amount of money they've raised. On Orchard Park, it's tough to live in Buffalo sometimes when it's cold. This has been a ticking time bomb for the last 4 seasons. Ever since the 13-second thing that happened on a football field, that was it. That's something where it's like you can't unsee what's happened. They played a perfect game against Kansas City. Josh Allen was perfect. Gabe Davis was perfect. There were 4 touchdowns scored, a minute and a half. Like that stuff doesn't happen in real life. Okay. Right. And it's nearly impossible to come back from if it's not the next season. And I think that trading Stephon Diggs was a great move. I think both you and I would agree upon that. I think that since what they've done besides that hasn't been that great. And I think that this is something where it's like, all right, Josh Allen, we're going to run the ball. We're going to throw the ball to the tight end, and we're going to play defense with the defense that's completely different from 3 years ago. So I don't know, man. It's very, very Mike Tomlin-y with Sean McDermott. It's good enough is good enough. Winning record is better than, maybe improving. I think it's Buffalo.
Well, I think the pressure's mounting in Buffalo. I think that's the reality that, I think the people there know, hey, we saw some big changes this year. There could be sweeping changes if we don't do something this year. Like, we thought about it last year. Hey, if the Bills don't get it done, is Sean McDermott getting fired? This year, I think he is absolutely on the hot seat. That's absolutely the case. And not only that, but I'll move to my next one. And it's another coach that I think is going to be on the hot seat if his team takes a step back. And I expect that they'll take a step back. And it's the Philadelphia Eagles. All right. The Eagles, I don't think, have made drastic improvements to their defense, which completely fell apart last year. They added some pieces. They got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back, but I think that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is just a good starter. He's not like a insane difference maker or anything like that. The Lions barely had him last year and still were able to do some decent things. You lose Hassan Riddick, trade him over to the Jets. I know they bring back Bryce Huff, but I just don't know that the Eagles defense is fundamentally different. They had issues at cornerback. I don't know if those issues are going to be solved. Can Ringo finally step up and be something? Darius Slay is another year older. James Bradbury is another year older. I just don't know if they made that defense significantly better. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you lose a guy like Jason Kelce, and guys are getting paid a ton now at both the wide receiver spots. A.J. Brown got an upgrade. Devontae Smith finally got paid. Lane Johnson is a year older. And I just don't know. if Jalen Hurts can overcome all of that. Now, they made some changes with coordinators, but I just think Philadelphia is a team that right now is searching for the answers, and I don't know if they have them. And with the pressure that's on them to perform, a guy like A.J. Brown who's going to bark and complain and cry and do all of that diva stuff, and then Nick Sirianni with his brash personality, that cuts both ways. When you have a guy like Sirianni, when things are good, they are great. They are incredible. He's, yelling the F word at fans, throwing the birds at people. The players love that. But when things are going bad and he's super cold and he's mad and he's angry and he's kind of volatile in the locker room, that rubs the players the wrong way too. So that's part of the problem with having one of those super emotional coaches. I'm an emotional guy. I like the highs and the lows. It's when you're a head coach, it's hard to do that because the players feel it too. So it's best to be even keeled. So Philly is high on my list, like Buffalo, of powerhouse teams that are always highly rated and expected a lot of, who could take a major step back.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The one thing that Philly has going for them, there's a couple. One is Jalen Hurts is better than anybody expected him to be. Like, come on, let's be real here.
He's still a very good player. Yeah.
Remember, freshman year, he could not throw a football in Alabama. He was a running back with Bo Scarborough. That was their back.
What a name.
Okay. Then he went to Oklahoma, and Lincoln Riley changed his life, and he grew into this incredible leader. And he was a great leader in Alabama, too, very early age. When Tua got hurt, he won a playoff game for them. Like, that was always there. But his talent level as a quarterback wasn't. And then he sprouted and he matured at Oklahoma. And still, from day one, I think his first game, he beat New Orleans, who was a winning team. He went into New Orleans and beat them. It's like, oh, my goodness gracious. And then, the rest is history. The biggest problem Philly has is their coaching, as you mentioned. The best thing that they have going for them is Howie Roseman, who's really decided, listen, I'm going to be a good GM now. I'm going to draft well. All of these players are going to drop to me. I'm going to be the mock draft darling as GM because I'm going to draft all the guys that everybody loves. They drafted Cooper DeJean, drafted the kid out of Toledo that dropped this year. They got arguably the two best corners in the draft. That's where I think that it's going to be more sustainable. Okay, their floor is going to be higher. But what Buffalo has for them, they've got a better coach. Like we saw last year, Nick Sirianni was as good as Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon were. Okay, what you just described, Tyler, which is going to be the biggest Achilles heel for them, is when things are great, that means the players are playing well. It doesn't matter what the coaching is. When things are bad, that means the players aren't playing well and they have no coaching. This is Cliff Kingsbury to a guy who made it to a Super Bowl. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're only as good as your coordinators are and as your players are playing. So I could see it. I don't know which division is better right now. It's going to come down to divisional race, the NFC East and the AFC East. Like, you would think the NFC East is better, but the other two teams really aren't good. And then it's just Dallas and Philly. And then how good is New England going to be this year? How good is Miami going to be again? Are the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, who has a tougher go? And I think Philly has an easier go in their division than Buffalo does, especially if Aaron Rodgers can be healthy for an entire year. It's close, right?
I think it's incredibly close. It's going to be such an interesting thing to see play out. The Jets are the real wild card in that. If the Jets stay healthy and the Jets are decent like people expect, then I think it goes to the AFC East. Is probably better. You know what I mean? But that's going to be something that we follow all season long. But with that being said, let's look at the other side of this coin. Which of these powerhouse teams is just going to keep on rolling? We're going to talk about that. And then which of these old guard quarterbacks, the old Cowboys in the NFL, are set to have a good 2024? We'll discuss that. Before we do, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the best place to buy tickets. I've bought football tickets, baseball tickets, basketball tickets, concert tickets on Game Time. They have everything that you need, and they have the best features in the business. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices. You get a panoramic view from your seat so you know what it's going to look like when you sit down. And they have the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time's going to credit you 110% of the difference. Look, guys, it's summertime, It may be slow in the NFL. The NBA may be over, but it is a great time to get you some MLB tickets and go catch a ball game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets for the MLB with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Alex, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. We're talking about the powerhouse teams, the best teams in the NFL. We told you that Philly and Buffalo may be primed for a step back, but a lot of these teams are probably just going to keep on rolling. And I kind of let you take us out of the gate there, Alex. So I'm going to start us off here with the team that I kind of believe is just going to keep on rolling. Before I do, thank you again for making Locked On NFL your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. NFL content all year round, always free. As you can tell, it's a little bit of a dead period in the NFL right now, but we're continuing to pump out Monday through Friday NFL content for you here on Locked On NFL. So make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But for me, it's San Francisco. And a lot of it comes down to coaching. They just have such consistent coaching. I'm such a big fan of Kyle Shanahan. I can never hide it. I can never put makeup on the pig. It's just obvious all along. I love Kyle Shanahan, and as long as he is their football coach, they are going to be a good football team. It's going to take catastrophe with injuries like we saw a couple years ago where they ended up getting a high pick and making the move for Trey Lance and the Nick Bosa thing. It's the injuries that really put them away. But with all of the talent, they have on that team, and they still have Brock Purdy on a cost-controlled contract. So there's nothing right now to rock the boat other than if they trade Brandon Ayuk. That would be a mistake. They cannot do that. And the further that we get along into the summer, I don't care if Ayuk's crying on social media all the time and blah, 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 doing his negotiations in the public. I don't care about that. There's no way that San Francisco is going to let Brandon Ayuk go. Like, they just can't do that. I don't think that they will do that. And if that's the case, with all the talent they have Bosa, they have Warner. On the offensive side, you still have Trent Williams. They're trying to build the offensive line back. You still have Debo. You have Ayuk. You have Christian McCaffrey, who's on the cover of Madden this year, which can be a little scary. But, I think he'll be all right. They just have too much talent, good coaching, good internal structure in the organization. Like, they have everybody rowing the same direction all the time. So to me, I have a hard time finding any valid reason why San Francisco would take a significant step back. I think they just keep on rolling, and I think they're going to be the number one seed in the NFC again.
And this, just to clarify, this is for 2024 only. Having a conversation about San Francisco after this year could be incredibly different. And we'll do the next 5 year, the 5-year plan for Powerhouses, I'm sure sometime this summer. John Lynch has made 2 mistakes personnel-wise giving contracts. I'm not talking about the draft specifically. Trading DeForest Buckner and paying Debo Samuel. Those are the 2 biggest mistakes that he made. Okay. And obviously the Trey Lance, but that's a completely different thing.
I would say, trading up to draft Trey Lance.
Right. But I'm saying, that's a draft thing. I know DeForest Buckner was traded on draft day for Javon Kinlaw, but moving off DeForest Buckner was a mistake, and paying Debo Samuel was the biggest mistake that he's made. And Debo Samuel did the same thing that Brandon Ayuk is doing now, but they're now reaping what they've sowed, paying Debo Samuel, because if they didn't, he'd be on a different team, and then Brandon Ayuk would be their number 1 wide receiver. You can't knock them for paying Christian McCaffrey the money that they would have had to allocate to Brandon Ayuk. He's the most important offensive player we've seen in the last decade. That's not a quarterback. So I agree with you there to a certain degree, except for, say it. What's my line?
Patrick Mahomes until it isn't.
It's Patrick Mahomes until it isn't. And we didn't do this segment just to set that up because it's closer. First of all, he shouldn't have won last year. Okay? He shouldn't have won 2 years ago either. Like, the way he's winning Super Bowls is what special players do. Aaron Rodgers couldn't do it.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers never won a special Super Bowl. That was a special Super Bowl that they won last year. They shouldn't have beat Baltimore. There were a couple passes that kept drives going with Travis Kelce. Never should have happened. Okay, yes, the Zay Flowers fumble helped. But, they shouldn't have gotten there last year. And they did with the worst offense he's had. Okay? And what we're seeing now is even superstars. They did this later in Tom Brady's career, okay? They're doing this very early in Patrick Mahomes, having a true RB1 to touch the ball 25 times a game.
Yep.
That's a mainstay. Like Tom Brady, they didn't do that until Tom Brady was 35 with LeGarrette Blount. They had like Fred Taylor and they had Corey Dillon and they had guys. But, Lawrence Maroney, I think it was Lawrence Maroney was the two guys because the two Minnesota guys, him and Marion Barber, RIP. Like that, they did that a lot later. Now, this is a controlled environment with the best quarterback we've ever seen potentially. So that is nightmare fuel where you can eat clock with an RB1 with Isaiah Pacheco. They're going to only bring in more RBs. Even if when Travis Kelce's gone, it's an institution now. So the fact that he won last year only solidifies the fact that he's the most special quarterback we've ever seen already. And I know it's early. He's already won a handful of Super Bowls where other guys who were looked up to be better than him didn't. You got to win, not just getting him. So,
he's the most talented, physically talented quarterback that's ever played. And I don't know, like you could say Aaron Rodgers, maybe number 2. I think that's, a valid argument that Rodgers is 2, but I don't see how Patrick Mahomes has just as good of an arm, if not better than Aaron Rodgers. And he's more mobile too. So like, and he's a better teammate.
He's got the brain of Peyton Manning.
Yes.
He's got the gunslinger mentality of Brett Favre, but the controlled nature of Aaron Rodgers with Tom Brady isms of leadership and making it look easy and always being about the team and never bitching about the talent that they have. He didn't bitch. Like he was like, oh yeah, it's going to suck that Tyreek's not here anymore. Onward and upward. Let's roll.
Yep.
He's the perfect mix of everything that's been great from the quarterback position. And he's not 30 yet. Like, what are we doing here, guys?
Yeah.
So that's why for him, do you have anything else to add? Like, it's the two teams who made the Super Bowl last year. Like, is there any?
Not on KC.
What about Baltimore?
Well, I think Baltimore is a good option, but what I worry about with Baltimore is the changes on the offensive line because that's, they lose both their tackles or not both their tackles, still have Ronnie Stanley, but they get rid of Morgan Moses. They're making some changes there. The team that sticks out to me is the Detroit Lions for the reason of the offensive line. Their offensive line made minimal changes. I think their offensive line is just fantastic, and offensive line play will always translate. They're trying to make their defensive line better, which I think is a big step for them. They got to get better in the secondary as well, and I like some of the additions they made with Carlton Davis and Tyrion Arnold. I'm just high on Detroit. I think Green Bay is coming for them, and that's going to be a very, very interesting battle. But Detroit is still going to be a very good football team. Like, they're not going to miss the playoffs or something like that unless, obviously, there's devastating injury, Jared Goff gets hurt, stuff like, Penei Sewell, Hutchinson, they're top players. If they go down, the ultimate equalizer in the NFL is always the injuries. That's why things are so crazy all the time. But Detroit's offensive line is so good, and they kept their coaching staff intact. I think Detroit is just going to keep on rolling and continue to get better.
And I will say one thing about Baltimore before we pivot to the old dogs here. If Derrick Henry plays 17 weeks and they figure out how to explode like Tim Tebow's rushing attack did in Denver that year with him and who was it, Willis McGahee? I can't even remember. That is going, like, Derrick Henry still got some juice. He does in the right environment. They've got Keaton Mitchell. They've got running backs for days. They got that offense. Just like I said about Patrick Mahomes, if they can run the ball and just be on the field for 38 minutes a game and just have opposing offenses on the other side, that could definitely be a team that could take a step, but in a much more old school run the ball first and second kind of thing instead of Lamar Jackson throwing the ball. With that, there's a couple guys, elder statesmen, who have won before, kind of regressed last year for varying reasons. Which one is ready to be thrust into playoff action in 2024? We'll discuss that next. Just really quick, though. Are you sick and tired of just hearing Fox Sports and ESPN just yelling and bitching and arguing? Well, we've got an alternative for that. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program to you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Old dogs next. Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, and Tyler's I will let him. I'm not going to step on his toes for who he thinks is going to be thrust into action and into the playoffs once again with their current or a new team in 2024. Thanks for making Locked On NFL your first listen, free wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Before we dive into the old quarterbacks, though, Alex, we do got to tell these fine folks about FanDuel Sportsbook. It's summertime. That means baseball season is here. The NHL Stanley Cup still going, and some great golf tournaments all summer long. And you can bet it all on FanDuel, because right now new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from who's going to win MVP in the National League to who's going to hit a home run, who's going to win the Conn Smythe, and you can get some early NFL bets going as well. Make sure that you visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
So, Tyler, we've got a couple old dogs that have, maybe a couple years left. I mean, everybody's playing until they're 45 anyways. So this isn't the end. This is the beginning of the end, and the end could be 3 more, seasons from now, depending on who we're talking about here. Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, and yours, I'll toss to you here in a second. They're guys that some of the best quarterback play we've seen in the last decade or longer. A couple have won a Super Bowl. Aaron Rodgers hasn't won a Super Bowl in the last 20 years. Has it? Or almost 20 years? 15 years? Kirk Cousins is still afraid of prime time, but in a new surrounding with a bunch of, new young position players, maybe him. Tyler, before I give you mine, who is yours, the elder statesman from the quarterback position that is going to be thrown back into the playoffs with his performance in 2024?
So, we talked about the list of guys that this could be, Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford. There's a lot of names in there, but I'm going to throw in kind of a wild one. Russell Wilson. Look, we know that Mike Tomlin always has a winning record. So they're going to be fighting for a playoff spot and on the bubble, in the graphics and all of that by the end of the season anyway. In Arthur Smith's system, I think that Russell Wilson can hit that play action, throw bombs to George Pickens. They could get the run game going with an improved offensive line. I think that the Steelers, with their defense and with the improved offensive look, Arthur Smith wasn't a very good head coach in Atlanta. Call it what it is. But he is a far better offensive coordinator than Matt Canada. So, to me, Russell Wilson is one of these old quarterbacks who people are kind of writing off a little bit, who I think could lead his team to the playoffs as a wild card team. The Pittsburgh Steelers are on my radar as a potential playoff team, and I think Russell Wilson is much better than Justin Fields. So I think Russell Wilson is an older quarterback who has been kind of swept under the rug that people need to keep in the back of their minds here. I don't think that he's going to break out and be an MVP or anything like that, but I absolutely think, and at times in Denver last year, he was playing decent football. He wasn't horrible. So I think that Russell Wilson with the Steelers could have a bounce back year, old guard quarterback, cowboy mentality, and get the Steelers back in the playoffs again.
Yeah, I like it. We'll see. Oh, that Denver just left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. I don't even know if it was Russell Wilson's fault. There were rumblings that, when he called out or didn't call out his offensive line through his agent, it's just once that starts happening, there's a sacred bond between an offensive line and a quarterback that's just, you just don't do that. Even if everybody knows, you just don't do that. Right. And he did. And then, the douchebaggery in Denver, that should have been the name of that experience there.
Right.
But yeah, I could see that, especially in the controlled environment with Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin. I could see that. I think it's Aaron Rodgers, and it sucks. But the one thing that pisses people off about Aaron Rodgers more than anything is when he plays, he's really good still.
Yeah,
he's the best quarterback.
It's frustrating.
If he plays all year, he could easily have a better year win-loss wise than Josh Allen, than Jalen Hurts, than maybe Lamar Jackson. That offense is demon fuel. Okay. They've got a number one wide receiver. They've got a number one running back. They've got a number two running back. They've got a good offensive line. The defense has improved, even though they made that ridiculous trade for Hassan Reddick, who hasn't showed up to camp. Like, if Aaron Rodgers comes in and is Aaron Rodgers for 17 weeks, I don't see a world where they're not vying for the AFC East title. So with that, it's just the interesting. So I'm going to say Aaron Rodgers, like Matthew Stafford. The reason why I don't say Matthew Stafford, even though he's kind of he's really come up obviously since being in LA, but their roster isn't as good as the other teams. Like Kirk Cousins, he's got a brand new offense. They're going to give the ball to Bijan Robinson. They're going to Arian Foster Bijan Robinson this year. He's going to have 350 touches. Like, this is the year where he explodes. And then, the funny thing about all of this, though, Tyler, is each of these guys have a pronounced run game in their own. So those numbers can definitely be down this year. It's going to be Kyron Williams and Blake Corum. It's going to be Najee Harris and Jalen Warren. It's going to be Breece Hall and the other three running backs they have there. And it's going to be Bijan Robinson with Kirk Cousins. So we could see down years passing numbers-wise for these guys, but still wildly effective years. And all four of these teams can make the playoffs, right?
Yeah, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
The Rams are probably the team that's on the outside looking in as opposed to the other teams, but we'll see if the young defense can hold up.
Yep. I agree with you. Well, it's going to be an interesting season. Obviously, it's still summertime here in the NFL, but there's always big news. There's always fun stuff to talk about. So make sure that you're staying tuned in to the Locked On NFL podcast, your team every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. That's going to do it for me, Tyler Rowland, my co-host, Alex Clancy. As I tell you guys every week, start your weekend early and stay safe out there.